Welcome back to the Burnout-Free Nurse Podcast. I am your host, Shonda Nicole, and I have been a nurse for 22 years. And I'm super passionate about helping nurses to build careers and life that they can actually enjoy without losing themselves in the process. And this episode, the episode that we're going to have today, it wasn't planned months in advance. It actually started just from a question that I was able to ask some of you online. The other day on my Facebook, I asked, when nurses stop going above and beyond, is it burnout? Is it disengagement? Or are we finally learning how to set healthy boundaries? And I expected a few different opinions, but what I did not expect was how deeply the question would resonate with various people. I received comments on the question on Facebook. I received comments in my stories, and I also received actual text messages. And one theme that showed up over and over is that nurses weren't saying, I set boundaries so I wouldn't burn out. What I was seeing and hearing was, I burned out, and then I learned how to set the boundaries on the back end. And story after story sounded really familiar. Like new nurses were excited, wanting to improve themselves, staying up late, staying over late, picking up extra shifts, being a dependable person. And then somewhere along the way, that extra effort quietly became what people just expected from you. And when something becomes expected, it stops feeling like generosity. It starts to feel more like an obligation. And then exhaustion shows up. And then finally, some years later, when we've carried all of the exhaustion that we can, the boundaries start to show up. And that made me stop and think, what if boundary isn't the beginning of the conversation? Like, what if talking about boundaries isn't where it starts? What if it's the result of not having one? And that question raised another topic, or raised another question. And that question was, what are we teaching nurses, like in nursing school? What are we teaching them that it means to be a good nurse? What does that look like? Because I don't remember anybody ever saying to me out loud, to be a good nurse, you got to sacrifice yourself. I don't remember anybody saying that, but we watch it modeled if we think back. Even if we pay attention to how we move. We see nurses skip their lunch. We see them stay late. We see them carry more. We see them say, yes, I'll do that. Yes, I can do that. And then we start to believe that that's what commitment is supposed to look like, right? And then there was one comment a young lady made on the post, and it stopped me for a minute. And she said, well, I've always had my boundaries, and I'm still feeling the burnout. And what this reminded me of is that there's not just a simple fix. I feel very strongly about the power of boundaries. I teach boundaries, but I also know that boundaries by themselves cannot fix the systemic issues, the unsafe staffing, the workplace culture, the moral distress, or even the systemic problems that exist in healthcare. And that's when I realized that there's actually two conversations happening simultaneously, and we can't just focus on one or the other. Both have to be talked about. And one of those conversations is about nurses and what we have the power to control, and that's protecting ourselves. The other is about creating the environments and the systems that allow nurses to thrive. So maybe the question isn't, why aren't nurses setting boundaries? Because some of us are. Maybe the better question is, why do we as nurses have to experience burnout before we feel permission to set them? And I've sat with all of this over the past week, and I've thought about my own career and the 22 years that I've put into my profession. That's a long time. And one thing I know now that I wish I'd known earlier is that being a good nurse and being endlessly available, they're not the same thing. I have realized that I care so much about the patient outcomes, my coworkers, the environment, and I can still give really, really good care and have boundaries. And those things don't have to be in conflict. You don't have to choose one or the other. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, that's my story, I want you to know that you're not in this by yourself. The conversation isn't about blaming you. This conversation is not even about blaming healthcare. It's about being honest enough to hold two truths at the same time. Because a lot of times we think there's only one truth. And two things can be true. Nurses need boundaries. And healthcare systems need to change. Those are things that we have to pay attention to. And so if you've taken the time to listen to this podcast episode, if it spoke to you in any way, I'd love for you to share your story. Share this podcast with another nurse, and then share your story with me. You can do that here. I want to know, did you learn boundaries before or after burnout? Join this conversation with me. You can join me on Facebook. You can join me on Instagram. You can comment below this video. The best ideas for this podcast are coming directly from nurses just like you. And until next Tuesday, remember this: you can be deeply committed to nursing without sacrificing yourself to it. You can take care of yourself without sacrificing who you are. I'll see you guys back next week for another conversation that nurses aren't having.